She's laying on the ground in the back by the railroad track.
What's the address?
I don't know.
Who are you?
Today's case is a difficult one. I'm talking about Becky Watts, a 16-year-old girl who was taken from the world by her own stepbrother in a sexually motivated attack. Becky had 2 older siblings. She and her biological brother, Daniel, were 2 years apart. Becky also had a stepbrother, Nathan Matthews. Becky and Nathan were much further apart in age, 10 years to be exact, and he visited the family house occasionally but did not live with them. Well, Nathan did not take to liking Becky very much. She was so much younger than him. They had nothing to do together, and he found her to be annoying. Sadly, when Becky was only 12 years old, she was diagnosed with anorexia. Becky had lost a lot of weight in a short amount of time and wouldn't touch her food at meals. To make matters worse, her stepbrother Nathan would criticize her at home. Even though Becky had almost been hospitalized because of her eating disorder, Nathan ridiculed her, telling her that she needed to lose more weight. When Becky was 15 years old, her stepmother Angie was diagnosed with MS, also known as multiple sclerosis. She loved her stepmother. The last time Angie saw Becky was on Tuesday, February 19th, 2015. Angie had left the house around 11:15 a.m. for a doctor's appointment regarding her MS treatment. Becky had gone to hang out with a friend on Wednesday, February 20th, 2015, and slept over at their house. But on Thursday the 21st, Becky didn't post anything on social media or reply to her friends' messages. Angie noticed that she still wasn't home yet, but assumed that Becky was staying over at her friend's again. However, when Friday the 22nd rolled around and Becky still had not returned home, Becky's friends were scared. She hadn't responded to any of their messages in days or posted anything. They decided to head to her house and see if she was there. When they arrived, Angie went into panic mode. She had assumed Becky was with her friends, but now that her friends were standing on her doorstep asking the same question, alarm bells started to go off. No one in Becky's family had seen or heard from her since that Tuesday. All of Becky's electronics, her phone, laptop, and tablet computer were gone. But her clothes, makeup, money, and everything else that a typical teenage girl has were left behind, untouched in her bedroom. After they checked the room and called around to other family members, Darren called the police to report her missing around 4 p.m. At that point, no one had seen or heard from Becky in almost 2 days. After a couple of hours, the police finally showed up at the house and began questioning the family and friends who were there. That's when Nathan's girlfriend, Shauna, said that she believed Becky was in the house on that Thursday. She never saw her, but heard movement in the house while she was there and assumed it was Becky grabbing something and slamming the door as she left. On February 22nd, the Avon and Somerset police started asking around for information on Becky's whereabouts. The very next day, Darren and Becky's grandmother held a press conference hoping to get the word out. Police, as well as volunteers, started looking in nearby neighborhoods, parks, and nature reserves. There were no leads, so they were looking everywhere they could. The authorities checked back in with Becky's friends and family. They wanted to make sure everyone's story added up. That's when they met back up with Shauna and Nathan, the last people to have seen, or I guess heard, Becky on Thursday. The glaring issue was Shauna and Nathan did not seem eager to talk to the police in the slightest. Nathan talked about how much he didn't care for Becky in his interviews. He claimed that Becky was rude to his mother. Shauna and Nathan's stories matched up just a little bit too perfectly, which caused authorities to be suspicious, almost like they had planned what they were going to say. After this, the police did a forensic scan of Becky's house. The authorities discovered red stains and fingerprints from 3 different heights in Becky's doorway. On February 28th, both Nathan and Shauna were arrested at their home in connection to Becky's disappearance, and on March 2nd, they were re-arrested on suspicion of murder. While the 2 of them were in custody, investigators got to work searching their home. When they got inside, the team could barely move around. Inside was a hoarding situation. It was covered floor to ceiling in boxes and random junk, and it was difficult to navigate. The police then went upstairs to search and finally made it into the upstairs bathroom. They find the bathtub and shower sparkling, shiny, and completely untouched. The one thing in the entire house that wasn't dirty. If that wasn't suspicious enough, the police found receipts from a hardware store dated the exact day that Becky went missing. Listed on the receipt were a circular saw, gloves, goggles, and face masks. On March 3rd, sadly, Becky's body was found dismembered in bags and boxes. On March 4th, Nathan was charged with murder. A funeral was held for Becky on April 17, 2015, at St. Ambrose Church in Whitehall, Bristol. She was just 16 years old. The prosecutors believed that Becky had been suffocated by Nathan during a sexually motivated kidnapping plan, in which Shauna was involved as well. After Becky was gone, the couple took her body and stored it in the trunk of their car and went back into the family home as if nothing had happened. Hours later, the two of them drove back to their home where they spent multiple days dismembering Becky's body by knife and saw, which were purchased at the hardware store, stashing the remains inside bags and boxes and hiding them in a neighbor's shed. DNA was found connecting both Nathan and Shauna to the items inside the shed. CCTV footage was found of Nathan and Shauna on February 19th going into a store to purchase batteries, which they used in stun guns during the attack. The day after Becky died, you can see Nathan purchasing a saw and other supplies. Just days after that, there's footage of both of them purchasing cleaning products to use for the bathroom, where they carried out the dismemberment. Nathan admitted that he did kill Becky, but it was merely an accident. He had intended on just kidnapping her as punishment for her rude behavior, and in the heat of the moment, he took her life. He claimed Shauna was innocent and was in the garden while the actual dismemberment took place. Text messages between the two were brought up in court as well, talking about their desire to kidnap schoolgirls months before Becky's death. The judge believed that Nathan had an unnatural obsession with underage girls and wanted to live out a fantasy of taking advantage of them. Shauna was persuaded to participate. After 3.5 hours of deliberation on November 11th, 2015, Nathan Matthews was found guilty of murder and Shauna Hoare was found guilty of manslaughter. They were convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, perverting the course of justice, and preventing the lawful burial of a body. To make things even worse, 4 other people stood trial for their involvement as well. James Ireland, Donovan Demetrius, Carl Demetrius, and Jadine Parsons were charged with assisting an offender by moving Becky's body out of the shed. In February of the following year, a bench was unveiled in Becky's honor at a park near Becky's home, hand-carved by Andy O'Neill. A mural was also painted in memory of her. The following March, Darren, Becky's father, released a memoir about her life, death, and trial proceedings. I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been to be in that courtroom and hear the horrific details. Later in 2016, both Nathan and Shauna filed appeals, but were rejected. The court had no reason to believe their sentencing was unfair. Nathan received a life sentence with a minimum of 33 years. Shauna was given 17 years in prison. And that, my friends, is the horrific story of Becky Watts' death at the hands of her own stepbrother. This story was particularly difficult to research as there was so much life for Becky to live. I hope that her family and friends are healing. What are your thoughts on this case? Is this one you've heard before? Because I sure haven't. Until next time, I'm your host, Brandy. Stay safe.
On today's agenda is the case of Pamela Shell. Through a series of unfortunate oversights, a woman's passing was ruled as a self-inflicted act. And on the surface, it seemed like it actually was. But one detective named Carl knew there was more to the story, and over 12 years later, brought justice to Pam's name. On a winter evening in 2001, in the rural town of Cuero, Texas, a chilling 911 phone call was made. Dispatchers were informed that 32-year-old Pamela Shell was found motionless in her bathroom with a bullet wound to the head. Most reports say Pam's boyfriend, Ronnie Hendrick, was the one who made the call, although at least one said it was Ronnie's stepdad. Regardless, the call was made and first responders were on their way. The police saw the pistol on the bathroom counter and red spatter everywhere. But here's what's weird. Pam's body was already removed from the scene. So this meant the police weren't able to see how Pam was positioned or anything. Important forensic details. But it seemed like they already knew what they needed to know based on the boyfriend's account. Officers wanted to pull Ronnie aside for a full interview, but he was already in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. All Ronnie told them was this: "I was outside when I heard a bullet ring from inside the house. When I ran into the bathroom, I found Pam covered in blood. Oh, and she was hardcore depressed about moving out of state, so that's probably what led her to do this." Now, to give you more backstory on Pam, she had 2 kids from a previous marriage, 12-year-old Kayla and 9-year-old Dustin. Pam was originally from Arkansas, but had been living with Ronnie and her 2 kids in Texas. And according to Kayla, Ronnie was very abusive and had assaulted Pam and the kids on multiple occasions. At that point, Pam knew it was time to leave Ronnie for good. The day of the incident, she'd packed up her things and made plans to drive back to Arkansas to live with relatives. Ronnie claimed that the reason for Pam and the kids moving was because he and Kayla didn't get along. And he said the only reason she decided to leave was because she would lose her kids if she didn't. Back at the hospital, doctors declared Pam brain dead, and they pulled her off of life support. Shortly after that, an autopsy was performed on Pam, and the medical examiner concluded that this was a self-inflicted act. One investigator on this initial case, named Carl Bowen, had a gut feeling that this wasn't as simple as everyone chalked it up to be. Yeah, I don't understand why everyone brushed off the part where Pam packed her things and was about to leave Ronnie, her abusive boyfriend. Also, Ronnie flaked on getting a polygraph test, and no other witnesses were subjected to a polygraph test either. Unfortunately, Carl wasn't in charge of making decisions on this case, so he couldn't really do much to fight back. But in 2008, 7 years after the initial crime, Carl had moved up in the sheriff's office, and his first task was to reopen Pam's case. During the new investigation, it was revealed that Ronnie had an extensive past of harming women. In fact, Carl discovered that Ronnie gave Pam a black eye the day before the incident. It was so bad she had to go to the hospital. That summer, as in 2008 when the case was reopened, Ronnie was brought to the DeWitt County Jail for beating up a woman he was living with. Right around that time, Carl discovered that since Pam's case, Ronnie had taken himself to South Dakota, where he got a DWI that sent him to jail for a bit. Carl convinced Ronnie to do a polygraph test about Pam's case, where it was proven that good old Ronnie lied in his polygraph test. When he was further pressed about it, Ronnie refused to speak and threatened to lawyer up. Carl noted Ronnie switched up an important detail of the story this time. When he first gave a statement in 2001, Ronnie said he was outside with the kids when the weapon fired. Well, in his new 2008 statement, Ronnie said he was in the room with Pam when she took her own life. Ronnie claimed he was too scared to mention that detail originally because he didn't want to be framed for doing it. Carl reached out to Pam's kids and spoke with them. Kayla maintained that Ronnie was aggressive, especially when he had had too much to drink, and they didn't like each other at all. She also mentioned he would hit her mom occasionally and truly believed he was the one who did this to her. But even with this new information Carl found and presented, it wasn't enough to get a retrial. In 2012, Pam's case was featured on the TNT show Cold Justice. Cold Justice is a true crime show that presents older, unsolved cases in hopes that it reaches someone who knows something about the case to help bring the victim justice. The reason Cold Justice ran an episode on Pam was because Carl reached out to them about it. In this episode, a former prosecutor, detective, and crime scene investigator all got together with Carl and Kayla to go over the case details. Pam was clearly dealing with a lot. She was living with a harmful man and clearly wanted a better situation for herself and her kids. Pam loved her kids and wasn't the type of person to leave her kids behind with a toxic and abusive man like Ronnie. Several relatives and friends told investigators that Pam would never take her own life. Pam's bestie actually said that they had a conversation a few weeks before the incident about this exact topic. A woman they both knew took her own life, leaving her kids behind. Pam said she'd never be able to do that. But Ronnie's brother said otherwise. He claimed Pam had talked about and even attempted to end her life previously. Pam's brother, on the other hand, said he recently spoke with his sister who sounded normal, despite the issues she was having with Ronnie. And here's another reason to believe Ronnie was the one who offed Pam. So he actually had two brothers, Michael and Shannon. Michael said he and Ronnie immediately rushed to the bathroom when they heard the bullet. They claimed they performed CPR on Pam. Ronnie's mom also said she helped with the CPR. Well, the paramedics who first showed up to help didn't see red fluid on Ronnie or Michael. They also didn't see any signs of CPR being done on Pam based on how her body looked. Ronnie's older brother Shannon told the investigators from Cold Justice that when he arrived at the scene, there was a game warden who collected Ronnie's clothes to run samples of the bloodstains and was dusting his hands for any residue from a firearm. That was a flat-out lie. Yes, a game warden did show up, but they never did any residue testing as they didn't have a kit. Ronnie's clothes also didn't have any fluid on them. During their recreations, the team of detectives determined Ronnie could have come into the bathroom with a firearm as Pam was getting ready. So even though the angle and the wounds seemed self-inflicted, this true crime show team just determined that it could have indeed been done by someone else. Now, due to technological advances, the firearm was finally able to be swabbed for DNA. But guess what? There wasn't any. And if Pam really did this, there would at least be some of her DNA on the weapon, which means it was wiped clean. With that, Pam's COD was officially changed from self-inflicted to undetermined. But Carl still needed more answers and more evidence to pin the crime on Ronnie. He tracked down Pam's ex-husband and the father of her two kids. His name is Jesse, and he was serving time in jail when Carl found him. Jesse agreed to talk to Carl about the incident and said he spoke to Pam and Ronnie that day. Apparently, Jesse and Pam were planning to get back together, and he was the one she and the kids were moving in with. Jesse said he was talking with Pam when Ronnie grabbed the phone and told Jesse the only way Pam would be coming back to Arkansas was in a pine box, meaning Ronnie verbally threatened to end Pam's life the day it actually ended. And we know Jesse was telling the truth because he was hooked up to a polygraph machine that detected no signs of deception. With this final testimony, Pam's case was taken to a grand jury. Ronnie was indicted in November of 2012, and his trial was set for September of the next year. Pam's episode aired on its original date before the trial, and everyone in Cuero tuned in. On the day of the trial, 1/3 of the prospective jurors raised their hands when asked if they'd seen the episode. Several of them admitted their belief that Ronnie was guilty, so due to their biases, a mistrial was declared. The judge rescheduled the case to the summer of 2014, but the district attorney knew this would continually be an issue. Even if they moved the location of this trial, Cold Justice was a national show and so many people had seen Pam's episode. So the DA approached Ronnie's attorney. He said, "Okay, we can't get a jury today, but we will get one someday, and the jury is going to hear everything that was on Cold Justice, plus about 50% more. Every person who saw Cold Justice, except for the one guy, thinks Ronnie did it. A jury is going to think the same thing." So with that, Ronnie pled guilty to slaying Pam just one day after the mistrial. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison, which seems a little light if you ask me. But ultimately, Pam's family was thankful to at least have answers and some form of justice in the eyes of the law. They knew it would be a rough road of trials ahead, so this outcome saved a lot of time and heartache. Thank you so much for watching Killer Bites. I'm Lucy, and I'll see you next time.
So West Yellowstone has always catered to its tourists, and in town there was a restaurant owned by a couple named Brad and Brittany Brisbane. On top of owning the restaurant, Brad also had a job at the local high school where he was the cool gym teacher. His students absolutely adored him. Actually, everyone did. He was the super charismatic, trustworthy guy who loved to make people laugh. And on top of being athletic, funny, and smart, he was also pretty on the eyes, if you know what I mean. Let me guess, he also spent his weekends at the animal shelter nursing weak kittens back to health too, right? Brad loved both his jobs, his family, and the tight-knit community in his tiny town. Brad hardly ever missed a day of work, and if he had to, he would let you know way in advance, which was why it seemed so out of the ordinary one day when Brad had to leave class unexpectedly after getting a phone call. As Brad was rushing out, his son Jeremiah saw him in the hall with his coat on and asked where he was going. He said he was going to Belgrade, about 90 miles away to pick up his friend Larry Moore, who needed a ride. He told him he'd see him at dinner that night and hurried off. And that was the last time Jeremiah would ever see his father again. Jeremiah remembered how odd it felt that his dad had to leave school earlier that day. Even as a kid, he knew that was way out of the ordinary for his dad. But when Brad never came home that night, that's when the family knew that something wasn't just out of the ordinary. Something was wrong. Because that's not how Brad Brisbane behaved, boo-boo. When police interviewed Larry Moore, the friend Brad said he was going to go pick up, he confirmed that the two met at the diner as planned. But Larry was concerned. His friend seemed really depressed and said he thought that Brad might have driven to the diner under the influence because he was slurring by the time he got there. From everything we've learned about Brad so far, does this even sound in character, like at all? But apparently he was just tired of it all, tired of his life, tired of his wife, tired of the restaurant, decided it was time to leave. He asked Larry for some money. Larry handed it over and watched as Brad walked out of the restaurant. He watched Brad get into a red car with Washington plates and said the driver was a woman that he didn't even recognize. The two skirted, like skirt, out of there, like leaving Brad's car in the parking lot. When investigators went to check out the diner, sure enough, there was Brad's car sitting in the parking lot with no signs of foul play. They were like, okay, the story checks out. But his friends and family were like, to the no. Like they were adamant that Brad loved his family. And never did Brad even hint about potentially leaving his wife or talk about running away. They claimed that if that was the story that Larry told, then clearly Larry didn't know Brad. But that was the thing. Larry did know Brad. The Moore and Brisbane families had been tight for years. Brad and Larry were hunting partners, and the two went way back. Larry's wife, Shelley, even worked with Brad at the high school. She coached girls basketball and he coached boys. As the investigators continued to question residents of the town, they caught wind of rumors that Brad and Shelley Moore might have been having an affair. But they quickly found out that they were just rumors. They talked to Renee and asked if she had any suspicion her husband was cheating on her with Shelley, and she was like, what? No, absolutely not. They asked Shelley too, and she also denied it, claiming the affair was a figment of Larry's imagination. Coincidentally, just 2 days before Brad went missing, Larry and Shelley separated. In fact, Shelley was one of the first people to suggest looking into her husband, or I guess ex-husband, about Brad's disappearance. As she continued talking with investigators, Shelley began to paint a very troubling picture of Larry and his behavior during the last few months leading up to his disappearance. So Larry and Shelley had been having marriage issues for a bit, and in October of 1990, Larry suffered a nervous breakdown and was convinced that Shelley was cheating on him with Brad. She wasn't, but he continued to accuse her of it, and by the end of October, Shelley had filed a restraining order against him after he had gotten physically violent with her and put his hands around her throat. But then, a few weeks after Brad's disappearance, the police station was contacted by Brad via snail mail. The letter was from Brad Brisbane, who claimed he was alive and well, living in Washington State. Police took one look at that letter and were not convinced.
Hey Marge, who's that handwriting analysis guy we like? Ask him what he's doing on Thursday.
Meanwhile, a piece of forensic evidence barely the size of a quarter was being analyzed in a lab and was about to turn the entire investigation on its head. Since Larry was the last person who had supposedly seen Brad, detectives asked to search his camper van early on in their investigation. His van was absolutely spotless and looked like it had been cleaned from top to bottom. They found holes riddled in the floor of the camper as well as in the liner underneath. They also found bullet fragments from a .357 Magnum pistol. When they asked him about the holes in the floor, Larry told them that he once found a mouse in a camper on a hunting trip, and they were like, so you fired at it? And he was like, yep. But a little something on one of the curtains in the camper caught the eye of one of the investigators. He noticed this tiny, dark little blob on the curtain that looked like some sort of something. And he was like, hey, can I take this? And legit took the whole curtain off the rod and brought it with him as they left. The test revealed that the blob was a piece of human tissue, a piece of muscle. But before the police could even question Larry about this, another letter arrived from Brad. Definitely not Brad. The letter was postmarked from Washington, and in it he apologized for the strain he caused on everyone. He explained he wanted a new start and a clean slate, and that he had a wonderful woman helping him now. A few days later, Larry Moore got a similar letter in the mail. In Larry's letter, Brad asked him to make sure that Renee was taken care of, and that he drafted up some papers to make sure that she got everything from the marriage, since he was starting a new life with a new person. Well, apparently, Brad was so absorbed into his new life, he'd managed to misspell his own wife's name in the first paragraph of the letter. Obviously, the cops hadn't been buying these letters from the start, but by this point, were welcoming them with open arms because it just meant that they had even more evidence to convict Larry. The suspect, sorry. Investigators tested the letters with a chemical that reacted with amino acids and fingerprints. Scientists found numerous fingerprints on both the documents, but none belonged to either Brad or Larry. The next person to examine the letters was a dude with one of the coolest jobs in the world, a forensic document examiner, aka a handwriting analysis expert, or discoverer of forged signatures, if you will. The examiner found that both letters were typed on the same typewriter, and that the paper used was an inexpensive one found in most high schools. They didn't have that in my high school. The only part of the letter that was handwritten was Brad Brisbane's signature, which had been done in cursive. The handwriting expert noticed how the signature was full of tremors, which meant that whoever had signed it had taken their time slowly and carefully doing it. This was a smoking bun for the examiner, as signatures are typically done so habitually that there are hardly ever signs of tremor in them. The only time he'd ever seen tremor in signatures was if the person was diseased on something, under severe stress, or was trying to duplicate the handwriting of another person. They compared the signature on the letters against several documents Brad had signed before he had disappeared and discovered some discrepancies. In a birthday card he'd given to someone, Brad had written in all uppercase letters and printed his name in the same uppercase letters as the sign-off at the bottom. It seemed like Brad preferred to print when he wrote, and only signed in cursive on formal documents that required it. But the only thing they could do with that information was prove that Brad hadn't written the letters. It was going to be much more difficult to prove who actually did write them. But what about the human tissue in the camper? Wasn't that evidence enough that Larry had done it? I'm so glad that you asked me. While the tissue was proven to be human muscle, the experts argued that technically people can shed tissue like that without actually being deceased. Ew. To get a second opinion, they sent the tissue to a neuropathologist to examine what part of the body it was from. And he informed that the muscle they'd found was actually a piece of someone's cerebellum. Okay, gross. AKA a piece of someone's brain stem. Whoever this brain stem had belonged to was definitely no longer alive, but they couldn't prove it was Brad's just yet. Jiminy Christmas. They would need Brad's body to compare the DNA evidence with, but Brad's body had they not. But don't worry, because science rules. While they didn't have Brad's DNA to compare the sample to, they did have Brad's children, his mother, and his wife, and that was enough for them to solve it. Since kids get half of their DNA from their mom and the other half from their dad, they could look at all four of the profiles and isolate Brad's DNA profile through the process of elimination. The system they used to do this was the most sophisticated DNA test available at the time, and they were able to determine that the DNA profile they picked out was 100% consistent with being the father of the children and the son of the mother. Translation, that was definitely Brad's brainstem. With that discovery came a lot of mixed feelings for the Brisbanes. They'd known deep down that Brad was gone, but by now their pain and devastation had turned to anger that his assassin was still walking free, and they wanted justice. Larry was arrested and charged as a suspect in Brad's butchering, and prosecutors knew they were going to have one hell of a time proving he'd done it without the body. With the evidence that they had, they began piecing together a timeline of how they assumed the events went down. Break out the red string and thumbtacks. Prosecutors believe that the two met at the diner, like they had said, and somehow Larry lured Brad into the back of his camper. A ballistics expert compared the location of the brain matter to where the holes in the floor of the camper were, and mapped out with a laser where Larry must have fired from. The expert determined that Brad had been hit while he was either collapsed on the ground or crouched down at the time, and that the suspect had fired from a standing position toward the back of Brad's head. They figured that Larry had probably asked Brad to grab something for him on the floor, and as he bent down to pick it up, he was ambushed. Larry fired multiple times, hitting Brad in the shoulder and the head, sending tiny pieces of muscle and tissue flying. But because they were at a busy truck stop with lots of traffic, most likely no one heard the shots ring out. After that, Larry probably took the body somewhere and disposed of it. Larry worked for an excavating company and had access to all types of equipment that could help him hide a body very easily. After dumping the body, they believe Larry steam cleaned the camper and took out the carpet to hide the evidence. All prosecutors had to do was convince the jury of that. At his hearing, Larry pleaded not guilty and denied the charges, which meant that there was now going to be a trial, and sugar, we're going down swinging. Larry's trial date arrived, and prosecutors argued that Larry snuffed Brad in a jealous rage after he was convinced that his wife was cheating on him. To throw them off the trail, Larry wrote some letters and forged some signatures. Larry tried to change his story, saying that he'd found a depressed Brad in his trailer with the pistol and he was in bad shape. Larry thought he was going to do something drastic and said Brad was injured when the two struggled over the pistol. He said he went to get Brad some water, but when he came back, Brad was gone. The jury found Larry guilty and sentenced him to 60 years in prison. It was the first homicide case in Montana to be tried without a body, and it was also the first time in the state that DNA was used in a criminal case. Just 2 years after he was sentenced, Larry made headlines again when he was charged with conspiring to build a detonator in prison. In order to avoid inevitably more years in prison, Larry agreed to lead the authorities to where he'd buried Brad's body. He brought them to a campground where he'd buried his pistol and pointed to a spot underneath the tree. They dug down a few feet and sure enough, there she was. Then he brought them to a gravel pit outside of West Yellowstone where they finally unearthed Brad's body. He never gave details about what happened or admitted what he'd done. But once they found Brad's body, Larry turned very pale and had to go sit down in the squad car. Oh yeah, dude, for sure. Go take a breather. I'm sure this has all been really tough for you. An autopsy of Brad's body revealed that he had holes in his chest and head from the .357 Magnum, just as the prosecutors had told the jury. He finally confessed to the crime in 2004 when he found out that it would be featured on season 8 of the crime documentary show Forensic Files. In true Larry fashion, he sent letters to the producers of the show where he finally admitted his guilt. In the letter he wrote, "I'm guilty, as charged, and I'm thankful that the truth finally came out. With help from modern technology, I have learned that telling the truth is the only answer." His words provided little comfort to the Brisbane family, however, whose children would have to grow up without a father. Jeremiah Brisbane told the producers of Forensic Files that all he wanted was to get Larry in a room with him, to look him in the face and ask him why. Well, I have good news and bad news for Jeremiah. The good news is that he might very well get the chance to do that soon, because the bad news is that Larry Moore was paroled in 2020 after serving only 28 years out of his 60-year sentence. While his release date hasn't been set yet, 73-year-old Larry Moore will probably walk out of those prison gates one day soon and experience things like iPhones, social media, Reddit for the first time, some TikTok videos. I wonder if he has any idea just how many people in the world now know who he is thanks to the internet. I don't know about you guys, but I think that Larry admitting his guilt and then getting paroled is probably one of the biggest bunch of bagel bun I've ever heard. The Brisbane begged the judge not to parole Larry, but apparently he'd shown enough signs of rehabilitation. Until next time, stay safe, my homies, and please make sure that none of your homies are thinking of committing homicide.
Hey there! You're watching Killer Bites, a show where we talk about all things true crime while cooking. Food and crime don't typically go together, but it's kind of nice to balance things out. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about Pam Hupp's many crimes while making roasted chickpea avocado salad. You can check out the recipe in the description below. This story is about one of the most twisted women to ever walk the face of the earth, Pam Hupp. She's believed to have slain 3 people in her life: her terminally ill coworker, her own mother, and some random guy who suffered from a brain injury. Why? It's not super clear, but Pam jumped through so many hoops to try and cover up these crimes. She pretended to be lesbian lovers with her first victim, made it seem like her second victim suffered a bad accident, and disguised herself as a TV producer to lure her third victim to his demise. Yeesh. On the evening of December 27, 2011, Russ Faria walked into his Missouri home to find his wife, Betsy, lying limp on the floor. 1 year prior, Betsy had been diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer that quickly metastasized to her liver and was deemed a terminal case. But that's not how Betsy passed away. When Russ came through the door, he found Betsy covered in puncture wounds that appeared to be from a blade. He then called 911 at 9:40 p.m. and told the dispatcher that Betsy ended her own life. When first responders arrived at the scene and laid their eyes on the 55 slashes that coated Betsy's arms, they thought otherwise. This had to have been an act performed by someone else. During their initial search, officials found another blade underneath a pillow on the couch Betsy was lying on and determined she had been lifeless for about an hour or so. After talking to friends and family of Betsy's, this is the timeline detectives came up with surrounding the event. That day, Betsy went to a chemotherapy appointment and then visited her mom. Betsy's friend and coworker, Pam, gave her a ride home from her mom's house. Pam said she dropped Betsy off right around 7 p.m., and she was the last person who reportedly saw her alive. But get this, someone else was gonna drive Betsy home, but after Pam took her from her appointment to her mom's house, Pam demanded she let her drive her home later that night too. Interesting. Betsy's husband, Russ, was at a friend's house watching movies until 9 p.m. After that, he claimed to have stopped by an Arby's for 2 junior cheddar melts and then drove home to the crime scene. Right off the bat, Russ was at the top of the suspect list. Not only did officials think his 911 call seemed strange, but they also found a bunch of incriminating evidence on the guy. So right now I'm gonna season my chickpeas. I have oil, paprika, salt and pepper, and garlic salt. For starters, searchers found a pair of Russ's slippers in his closet that was stained with fluid. He was subjected to a polygraph test, which he failed, and interviewers also mentioned he was acting very suspicious during his whole interrogation. On top of that, it was discovered through Pam that Russ had a pretty violent temper and was a big drinker. It's believed that Betsy was considering a divorce because he had threatened her one too many times. There was even evidence on Betsy's laptop to confirm this theory. And with that, Russ was arrested for executing his wife. This was just one day after she was discovered. He was charged in January of 2012, and his court date was set for November of 2013. Don't you just love how long these things take? For real though, this crime happened in 2011, and the perp isn't going to court until 2013. What's the holdup? Well, when November of 2013 finally rolled around, here's what Russ's attorney, Joel, presented. A solid alibi backed by 4 witnesses who were friends that he visited during the time the crime went down. Proof that he bought a few things throughout the night to show that he really was out and about when Betsy was whacked. Joel also highlighted the fact that Russ had no fluid or DNA on his clothes or body that evening. The prosecuting attorney then tried to shut down all of those pieces of evidence by saying Russ's friends must have lied to back him up, but it doesn't seem like she was ever able to explain the purchases he made. Those Arby's Junior Cheddar Melts don't lie, if you know what I mean. Aside from the proof that Russ wasn't the perp, his attorney also posed a new possible suspect, Pam Hupp, aka the friend who dropped Betsy off at home that evening. Here's why Pam seemed to fit the bill for Betsy's attacker. On December 22nd, 5 days before the incident, Betsy changed the sole beneficiary of her $150,000 life insurance policy to Pam. It used to be Russ. Ooh, this is some tea. No one knew that Betsy changed the beneficiary on her policy, and Pam was currently working for State Farm alongside Betsy, which makes things seem even more sus. If Pam worked at a life insurance company, that would mean she'd be pretty well versed in the matter. Pam first claimed that Betsy labeled her beneficiary and asked her to give the money to her daughters when they grew up. But later, she said Betsy told her that she was to keep the money all for herself. Okay, 2 things. 1, why couldn't Russ give the money to Betsy's daughters? Technically, Betsy had them in another relationship, so they weren't his, but he could still pass the money along to them, and it's not like the daughters were Pam's either. Number 2, why would Betsy switch up an important detail like that? That's such a strong claim to go back and just be like, oh, actually, Betsy's ghost visited me and said to cash in on this money. What if? After the whole beneficiary thing was discovered, Betsy's daughters tried to claim the money from the life insurance policy, but their case was dismissed a few years later. Those poor girls. Not only do they lose their mother in such a tragic way, but now they don't even get a penny from her policy? I'd be Another thing the attorney Joel brought up about Pam was that she appeared to have been in close range of Betsy's house during the time of the crime. phone records showed proof she was nearby for up to 30 minutes after she reportedly dropped Betsy off. Even after such a swaying presentation from the defense, the jury somehow found Russ guilty, and he was sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison. Huh? What about the receipts? They're just gonna let Pam off the hook like that? Sometime after the sentencing, a team from the local Fox News station partnered up with the newspaper, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, to look over the details of the case again. You know, just in case the investigators missed something. During the review of the case, the team found a few more inconsistencies between Pam's statements over the months. They also did an article on the 911 dispatcher who was on the other line when Russ called that evening. The dispatcher said Russ was very hysterical and panicked on the phone, and it all sounded very genuine. But here's the juiciest gossip. The article also hinted at a relationship between the prosecuting attorney, Leah Askey, and the captain of investigations for the sheriff's office, Mike Lang, who was also an investigator on Betsy's case, and he went to court as a witness for the prosecution. Oh, this is rich. Now I'm gonna roast my chickpeas. Well, Russ's lawyer, Joel, eventually caught wind of this drama too. In fact, a printout of a scandalous email was anonymously sent to him. The email appeared to be from Leah to Mike, which pretty much confirmed the speculation. In the printout, Mike told Leah, "This is not a puppy dog, crush on the hot girl in high school kind of love. This is an epic, stories are written about kind of love. I will do my best to be everything you need." I will do my best to be everything you need? Does that also mean you'll help pin an innocent man for slaying his wife? Joel also was sent a CD containing 132 photos from the crime scene that he had never seen. It seemed like the CD was sent from someone in Leah's office, but a handful of the images were blurry or completely black, which Joel thinks was purposeful. They must have been covering something up. With all of these sketchy things coming up, a judge finally ordered a retrial. This was in June of 2015. During the retrial, officials told the court that when Pam was interviewed most recently, she claimed that she was in a romantic relationship with Betsy. She said that that was why Betsy made her the sole beneficiary on her life insurance policy, and that would explain Russ's motive. Pam also later mentioned that she suddenly remembered seeing Russ in a parked car with another man. Yo, Pam is really reaching at this point. It was already near impossible for anyone to believe the claim that she was lovers with Betsy, because most people said she was homophobic AF. But now she's trying to claim two same-sex relationships? Dang sis, seems like you changed your beliefs quickly. Something else brought up during the retrial was the pair of slippers found in Russ's closet. At first, detectives thought the DNA evidence on the shoes was clear proof that Russ did it. But a CSI agent who searched the scene that day testified, saying she didn't think the slippers were stained by stepping in Betsy's fluid that day. Well, in November of 2015, after months in court, it was finally decided that Russ was not guilty, and his conviction was overturned. By that point, he'd already served 4 years in jail. Ugh, that is so terrible. Between walking in on his deceased wife to being pinned for the crime, Russ's life really was turned upside down by this case. Russ ended up suing the officers involved in this case, as well as the county. He walked away with a $2 million settlement, which is a decent chunk of change, but it still sucks that Russ had to go through so much trauma by being punished for something he didn't do. After all was revealed, a bunch of other drama came out about the judge on the case. So she and the prosecuting attorney, Leah, were both voted out of office. Good riddance. Well, while all of this was happening in Betsy's case, there were 2 other cases that Pam was connected to. First up was the passing of her mother, Shirley. Back in October of 2013, Pam's mom, Shirley, was found lifeless in her apartment. Just like Betsy, Pam was the last person who saw Shirley when she drove her home. So Shirley had dementia and arthritis. She was living in an apartment that was part of a senior living community. On October 29th, Shirley spent the night with Pam after a hospital visit. The following day, Pam dropped Shirley back off and gave the senior center staff a heads up that Shirley wouldn't be coming down for dinner that night or breakfast the following morning. Dang, you trying to starve your mother? The following afternoon, a housekeeper walked in to find the scene, and once officers arrived at the scene, they also found that the railing on Shirley's balcony was broken. The coroner who performed the autopsy on Shirley found evidence of blunt force trauma on her chest, which led them to believe she accidentally fell. The coroner also found a large dose of sedative in her system. And by large, I mean it was like 8 times the recommended dose. The following month, police officers got an anonymous tip from someone who said Pam slayed her mom for life insurance money. Seems to be a trend, doesn't it? So after Shirley's demise, Pam and her siblings got over $120,000 in investments and insurance money. A few months before the event, Pam was caught on video saying, "My mom's worth $500,000 that I get when she dies. If I really wanted money, there was an easier way than trying to combat somebody that's physically stronger than me." By the time the police received the tip, the investigation had already been closed, and Shirley's passing was determined accidental. But after this information surfaced, Shirley's case was reopened. Officers talked to the housekeeper and Shirley's son, who both said Shirley was pretty unsteady, so the case remained as accidental, and Pam was never pursued as a suspect, or even interviewed during the reopening of the case. Okay, Pam must be buddy-buddy with someone on the force, because I don't understand how she keeps getting let off the hook like this. And now let's move on to Pam's third possible victim, Louis Gumpenberger. Talk about a last name to remember. So Louis was a 33-year-old man who suffered from severe mental and physical impairments after he got into a really bad car accident in 2005. At 12:10 p.m. on August 16, 2016, the local police station got a call for help. Moments later, Pam called 911 and summoned them out to her house. When officers got there, they found Louis's corpse. He had been whacked with 5 bullets, and the marksman appeared to be Pam. Pam told officers that Louis, who she described as a random stranger, came up to her in her driveway with a blade and followed her into her home, so she grabbed her Ruger and bam! But things just weren't adding up. Louis was found with $900 on him, as well as a handwritten note that listed instructions to abduct Pam, get money from Russ, and then slay Pam. So that all sounds like Louis was hired by Russ to snuff Pam. But that'd be too obvious, right? What person hires a hitman and explicitly writes down the details of the crime? That's why investigators quickly realized Pam whacked Louis and staged the whole thing to make it look like self-defense. They believe Pam somehow got Louis in her car, drove him to her house, and planted the note, money, and blade before firing at him and calling the cops. Clearly, this ain't Pam's first rodeo. But as much as Pam tried to cover up her role in the crime, evidence began piling against her. Oh man. Officials pulled her cell phone records where they found out Pam was in Louis's neighborhood about an hour before he was slain, even though she said she didn't know Louis at all. The $900 found in Louis's pocket was in the form of 9 $100 bills. When Pam's place was searched, investigators found a $100 bill on her dresser that had a sequential serial number to 4 of the bills found on Louis. The blade Louis was discovered with appeared to have been purchased from a Dollar Tree, and our girl Pam was quite the regular there. Yeah, I don't know how many criminals purchase their tools at Dollar Tree. That had to be a thrifty girl Pam. A carpet swatch was discovered in Pam's home that covered up a portion of her rug that was stained with Louis's fluid. And it wasn't a mystery that Louis was executed there, but still, it's sketchy. Another thing to think about is the fact that Louis's ability to move and think clearly had been hindered since his accident. Due to the state he was in leading up to the incident, detectives didn't think he could have attacked Pam the way she claimed he did. Beyond all of this crazy information, there was something far crazier detectives discovered. Pam pretended to be a Dateline NBC producer named Kathy. Under her fake name, she approached a local woman and told her she was working on a story about 911 calls. This was 6 days before Lewis's slaying. Kathy/Pam offered the woman $1,000 to reenact a 911 phone call. This woman agreed to participate at first, but when this Kathy chick wasn't able to show any credentials that she really was this producer, the woman backed out. The woman later identified the fake producer as Pam Hupp, and security footage confirmed her identity as well. Apparently, Pam tried this trick on someone else who didn't fall for it, but Lewis, who was mentally and physically impaired, must have fallen for it. That's how detectives believe Pam lured him into her car that day. It would also make sense for the amount of cash found in Lewis's pocket and on Pam's dresser, because, 900 plus 100 equals 1,000. The exact amount offered for this fake Dateline NBC gig. So it is believed Pam did all of this to frame Russ, because right around this time, the whole retrial was going on, and Russ's team was blaming Pam for Betsy's demise. On August 23rd, Pam was arrested for the execution of Lewis. Shortly after her arrest, she went to the bathroom and jabbed her wrists and neck a bunch of times with a ballpoint pen in an attempt to end her life. Her attempt was unsuccessful, but it made her seem even more guilty of the crime. Yeah, she hadn't even gone to trial yet, so it's clear she really thought she was going to be found guilty in court. And that she was. Well, she actually admitted guilt herself because she entered an offered plea. This meant Pam maintained innocence, but admitted the evidence made her seem guilty. So instead of going through a lengthy trial, she accepted the plea bargain to be sentenced to life in prison and avoid lethal injection. Yeah, that still kind of sounds like she's guilty to me, but I'm no lawyer or judge. After receiving her sentence, Pam called her husband and said the only reason she took the Alfred plea bargain was because she didn't want her family to witness an ugly trial. Girl, that trial was ugly no matter how long it took. It literally involved the demise of an innocent man with brain damage. There's nothing pretty about that. Now I'm gonna add lemon juice and olive oil. Later, Lewis's mom sued Pam for fraud, misrepresentation, and the wrongful execution of her son. She apparently asked for a sum in excess of the jurisdictional limits of this court and was eventually given $3 million. Pam remains in jail to this day, where she will stay for the rest of her life. She has still never been pinned to Betsy or Shirley's case as the criminal. Although in 2017, Shirley's COD was changed from accidental to undetermined. Most recently, Pam has filed a motion to vacate her conviction because she said she was pressured to take the plea. Thankfully, her motion was denied, and months later, her husband filed for divorce. He said their marriage is irretrievably broken. Yeah, that's bound to happen when one of the people in the marriage is a raging criminal. Okay, but I just want to know why Pam was never charged for slaying Betsy. It was so obviously her. Like, what are these prosecutors doing right now? An innocent man just spent years in prison for a horrific crime he didn't commit, and now that he's freed and a new suspect is pinned, they just let it slide? Honey. I hate this chick. But I don't hate this chickpea avocado salad. Thanks for watching.
How old does a child need to be to fully understand the reality of life and death? For 5-year-old Hernlen, she could see the blood, but she may not have fully understood what had just happened to her parents. Whatever her grasp on the situation was, tragically, it was one she will never be able to forget. After finding her parents the victims of a ruthless murder, this little girl had the composure and the smarts to call for help. An incredible achievement in itself, though it does not make Tia's 911 call any less heartbreaking to hear.
911, where's your emergency?
Hello.
Hello. Is everything okay?
My mommy and daddy,
Uh-huh.
I think there's a bullet on the floor.
Where's Mommy at?
I don't know, I think they're dead.
What do you mean, sweetheart?
I don't know.
Okay, your daddy's on the floor. How old are you?
I'm 5 years old and I have a dog in the house.
Okay, baby, okay. Let me get somebody right over to you. Did you go in your mommy and daddy's room?
And there's blood.
All over the place?
Not all over. There's blood on the bed and blood on the floor.
Oh my goodness! And you have your little doggie with you?
And 3 cats.
Well, and you got some cats too?
3 cats and 1 dog.
Okay. Are you the only one there besides Mommy and Daddy?
I said Mommy and Daddy and they didn't even answer.
Okay. What made you wake up tonight?
I think I heard a gunshot.
You heard a gun?
Yes, and I see a bullet laying on the floor. I think it's a bullet.
Really? Who has a gun in the house?
I don't see a gun, but I'm scared.
Oh, sweetheart, I will not let anything happen to you.
Can you send the deputy down?
I promise I will. And you're only 5 years old? You are so smart for 5 years old. Was there anybody else in the house besides you and Mommy and Daddy tonight? Like an uncle or anything?
No, there's no robber in the house.
Okay, well, I didn't think there'd be a robber, sweetheart. Did you have anybody staying over the night with you guys tonight? Okay. So, and the doors are all locked and everything like that. Where are you in the house?
Well, I was in my room sleeping until I heard a noise shot and it woke me up.
Oh my goodness. What part of the house are you in at now?
I'm in the one, it's yellow, a whole yellow house, a green with it, a little bit of green, and a pink door.
Oh my goodness, that sounds really cool. Did you pick out the pink door?
No, my mom picked out the colors.
Look, I bet that's beautiful. Does Mommy and Daddy have a car in the driveway?
2 cars.
2 cars? What kind of cars do they have?
My mom has a Toyota.
What color is that Toyota? Is it dark or gray or silver?
It's red.
Red? Okay. What kind of car does Daddy have?
He has a Jeep. It's black and white.
Listen to me. Is your phone the kind of phone you can take with you and walk around? There should be an officer at your front door. I need for you to take your phone with you and walk over to the door and open it for me, okay? And I'm gonna stay on the phone with you, okay?
But
I will not hang up.
I'm naked.
Oh well, you want to go grab a towel or something? I don't think the officer's gonna care, baby. We just want to make sure Mommy and Daddy are okay, all right? Grab a blanket or something. Stay on the phone with me. Stay on the phone, all right?
Okay.
My name's Donna, by the way. You are doing a wonderful job. Wonderful job.
And I knew what to do for Stephen Dog.
You did great.
I knew.
You are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You should be very proud of yourself.
I'm to the door. I'm unlocking it.
Okay. You let me know when the officer talks to you. Okay, you go ahead. Okay, you talk to the officer.
Talking to the dispatcher? Okay, tell her I'm here now, okay? You can hang up.
Bye, sweetheart.
He's here.
Okay, sweetheart. You be good, okay?
Come on over here.
Bye-bye.
Daytona Beach, Florida, March 28, 2005. Little Tia Hernlen had just awoken to the terrifying sound of a gunshot. The young girl, who was yet to even start school, headed to her parents' bedroom to find her father lying lifeless. The chilling 911 that quickly followed from Tia framed these deaths as a murder mystery. It also raised the question as to how Tia herself had managed to avoid contact with the killer. Tia seemed to believe that this may have been a robbery, but the truth is actually far more disturbing. The killings of 29-year-old Denise Hernlen and his 31-year-old wife Julia were carried out by a criminal out for revenge. 33-year-old David Edward Johnson had targeted the Hernlens after he had been arrested for drug possession. Johnson believed that little Tia's parents were behind his arrest and that they had tipped off the authorities about Johnson growing and having possession of large quantities of. In reality, Neither Aeneas nor Julia had been to the police regarding Johnson and his criminal activity where drugs were concerned. They were not involved in any investigation that led to his arrest. This does not mean that they weren't acquainted with their killer, though. At one time, the Hernlens and Johnson had reportedly been friends. Whether that was true or not, no one ever expected such a frightful fallout. After his arrest, David Edward Johnson allegedly began stalking the surf-loving couple. He had arrived at the conclusion that his former pals had snitched on him, calling the police and reporting his criminal activities. This was untrue, but it didn't stop Johnson from seeking vengeance. He set out to ruin the lives of the Hernlens. Things eventually got so bad that Julia went to the police. Just a few months before Tia would wake up to find her parents dead, Julia attempted to get a court-ordered injunction to keep Johnson away from her family. This was their one chance to keep the family safe, to keep the family from being destroyed forever, but a judge denied the request, citing insubstantial evidence to go with the stalking claims. Johnson had not yet been violent at this point. There was no real proof that he had even been stalking the Hernlens. It was simply Julia's word, and ultimately, it wasn't enough to prevent her senseless death. When questioned about the case after the murders had been committed, Circuit Judge Richard Graham revealed that he wished he'd have acted differently at the time.
It was hard to prove stalking with the allegations. Looking back on it, I would have liked to have done it differently, but you review each case on a case-by-case basis.
Judge Richard's regrets mean little today, but for those of you hoping that David Edward Johnson was caught and brought to justice for the truly macabre murders, you may be in for a shock. After shooting Tia's parents, Johnson headed home, and later that day, he took his own life before authorities could arrest him. There was no note, no motivation or explanation for his actions. Did he know that 5-year-old Tia was in the house? Could things have been even worse had Johnson stumbled upon her bedroom? We will never know, but we do know that with 2 gunshots, David Edward Johnson took the lives of 2 innocent parents. News channels, both local and national, honed in on Tia's heartbreaking story. At just 5 years old, and after discovering a gruesome murder scene in which her own mom and dad were the victims, Tia kept her composure, spoke clearly to the 911 dispatcher, and provided them with all the information she was asked for. Sheriff Ben Johnson, when Tia made the horrifying discovery that night, her father Aeneas was actually still alive. The 29-year-old man was not pronounced dead until he reached the Halifax Medical Center in Daytona Beach. After surviving the ordeal, one would not expect a swift recovery. Tia moved to live with her grandparents in Central Florida soon after the deaths of her mother and father. Today, Tia's in her early 20s. She has carried on with her life while keeping out of the spotlight. She has never spoken about what she witnessed that fateful night, and we have no way of knowing just how much of it she remembers. Perhaps the most disturbing part of Tia's tale, though, is that the man who murdered her parents was once considered a family friend.
Was this missing little girl kidnapped? Was she lost? Or was she hidden inside the family's restaurant the whole time? Judging from this frantic 911 call from Dad, you'd have to believe that both parents had no idea where 5-year-old Ashley Zhao had disappeared to. But don't be so quick to judge. Your ears may well deceive you.
Jackson Township Police.
Hi, yes, I need some help.
Okay, where are you at?
4924 Portage Street.
4924 Portage?
Yeah.
Hey, what's going on?
I can't find my daughter.
Okay, how old is she?
5. She just turned 5. Jojo, stop it.
Okay, and you're at Ames?
Thanks, yeah.
When's the last time you seen her?
This afternoon, probably.
Around what time?
3, maybe 4.
What? So you haven't seen her in 5 hours?
You saw her in 5?
What was she wearing?
Oh, okay. What?
What was she wearing?
She's wearing a purple winter coat. I don't know what those things are called, but they're not jeans. They're like
leggings?
Yeah.
What color were they?
Grayish.
Okay, and you haven't seen her in 5 hours?
About, yeah. I mean, she was there sleeping. I mean, you know.
Where was she sleeping at? In the restaurant?
Yeah. She was sleeping there, and I picked up my older daughter from school. We all saw her sleeping there. So, and, you know, we went to work and, you know, we let her sleep. And we got busy, and then after it got busy, you know, we started cleaning up, and then, you know, we opened the door, and she's not here.
Hold on 1 second, okay? Okay, sir, what's your name?
Liang Zhao.
Okay, do you have any videos or anything in there where you can see a video, see if she was laying there?
No. We don't have any security camera in there. It's just in the restaurant. We've been here for 6 years. We never had security cameras here.
Okay.
So we saw her, like all of us, like my wife, myself, and my older daughter. When we came back, when I picked up my older daughter from school, we saw her there sleeping.
Okay, and so was there any suspicious people that came in at all? Do you think she could have walked out and ran out somewhere?
I have no idea. I mean, she was sleeping in the back. It's kind of hard to say when she was.
None of your employees had seen her?
There's only two of us, just myself and my wife. There's nobody else in the restaurant. There's only three people in the restaurant.
When you guys left, who was there with you? Like, who was there with your daughter when you guys left to go get your other kids from school?
My wife. I go pick her up myself. My wife is here in the restaurant. But when we came back, she's here. Like, my wife is here. The restaurant's open. The restaurant's always open. I usually open up. I drop my daughter off. I'm sorry. I drop my daughter off at school in the morning, and then we come here to open up.
Well, right now, though, like, when you left, you said you, your wife, and your daughter left to go pick up your daughter from school?
No, I didn't say that. I said my wife is here all the time.
Okay, and your wife hasn't seen her either since around 4 or 5 o'clock?
Okay. I think you. Okay, when I meant was myself. Okay, when I went to pick up my daughter, when we came back, myself and my daughter, not my wife. My wife was here the whole time. When we came back.
So your wife hasn't seen her since around the 4 or 5 o'clock either?
Yes. I mean, she says she's not sure before we got busy. Usually we get these around 4 or 5 o'clock. That's the best time we can, you know, like.
That's right. What's your daughter's name?
Ashley.
Okay. All right, my officer's outside if you want to go and meet my officer at the door, okay?
He's here right now?
Yeah, he's already outside.
In the front or the back?
He should be in the front.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Officers arrived to assist in the search for Ashley Zhao. With the blizzard raging outside, police knew that for Ashley to have any chance of survival, they would have to find the little girl fast. Police were set to race against the clock, but the reality soon set in that Ashley was not missing at all. She was dead. Though Ashley's parents offered the police search team the unhelpful tip that their daughter may have wandered off into the cold night, police searched the restaurant anyway. It didn't take long for them to make a horrifying discovery. That discovery was Ashley's body, concealed in the walls of the restaurant's kitchen. Ashley's own mother, Mingming Chen, later confessed to killing her daughter. Chen had grown tired from running the restaurant, and with one act of disobedience from Ashley, Chen took it upon herself to end her daughter's life as an unforgivable punishment. Chen then convinced her husband to hide the body and to then pick up the telephone and make that fateful 911 call. After her arrest, Mingming Chen attempted to plead insanity. She was charged with murder, but later pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. There was no get-out-of-jail-free card for Liang Zhao either. Ashley's father did testify against his wife, though, admitting that he did intentionally hide the body. He also stated that upon finding his daughter beaten and bruised, he attempted CPR. His last-ditch effort to save Ashley failed, and so sweeping his wife's appalling actions under the rug seemed the only option for Zhao. In 2018, just 1 year after Ashley's murder, and a few months after his wife's sentencing, Liang Zhao was sentenced to 12 years in prison. This restaurant closed its doors with a far more grotesque reputation than could ever have been previously imagined. Ohio, July 2014. A hard-working husband returns home to find his son unresponsive, and his wife desperately trying to revive the infant, or so it seemed, because when the truth eventually came out, it's not reasonable to believe that Brittany Pilkington was trying to save her son's life at all.
911, where's your emergency?
Yes, we have an emergency. Our little infant, he's not breathing at all.
Okay, can you start CPR?
Yes, My wife's trying. Keep going.
Who are we talking about? How old a patient?
He's 3 months.
Okay. Okay. What happened prior to this?
I don't know. I just got home and I went to check my son, and he's cold.
He's cold to the touch?
Getting cold to the touch, yes.
Okay. Is she doing CPR? Is someone doing CPR?
Yes, my wife is, but I mean, he's...
720. What is your name, sir?
My name is Joseph Pilkington. My son's name is Niall.
Okay, I have help on the way, sir, but I want to stay on the phone with you. Is anything happening with the CPR?
No.
Nothing's happening. Is she doing the CPR correctly?
Yes, she's still doing it. His lips are white.
His lips are white?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do 2 breaths and 30 compressions, okay?
2 breaths and 30 compressions.
Make sure the airway is clear. Tilt his head back. And you put them in the palm of your hand, like on your forearm, and push down in the middle of his chest with 2 fingers. Okay?
Keep going, honey. Keep going.
Is he crying or anything?
No. Niall, come on, baby. Keep going. Not too much.
Is anything happening? You want me to count with you?
Son, I hope the ambulance is on its way.
Yeah, they're on their way. The Bell Fountain Police Department sending the ambulance, okay?
Yeah.
What's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Brittany.
Okay, is she still doing the compressions? Is anything happening?
Yes. She's very pale.
Is that him?
That's my son, Gavin.
Oh, okay.
Let's go back in the other room now. Go.
All right, we'll keep the compressions going. Is he changing color or anything like that?
No, he's pale. He's white.
Okay, still do the compressions, okay?
Yeah.
The squad is already on their way, okay?
Yeah. Let's go back in here, please.
How's your wife doing?
My wife's name is Brittany Pilkington.
How is she doing? Is the compressions helping or?
Doing it, ma'am, but his arms are purple now. Nothing. Has he got a pulse now? No. No pulse.
There is no pulse.
No pulse. He's got no pulse now.
Okay, we still need to keep the compressions. Don't stop doing the compressions.
Keep doing the compressions, honey. Keep pushing on his heart.
Now, you're not pushing on his heart. You're pushing in between his nipples.
Yeah, that's...
2 fingers.
Yeah.
Does she have them on her forearm? Is it kind of easier to do it like that?
Ma'am. Oh, up here. Up here.
Okay, the squad's going to be there to help you, okay?
The emergency services were too late to save little Niall Pilkington. And to make matters all the more heartbreaking, Niall would be the first of 3 of Brittany and Joseph's children to die over the next 18 months. 3 heinous acts and a later confession from Brittany would quickly turn this tragic phone call into something best at home in a horror movie. After ending Niall's life, Brittany would wait less than a year before killing again. In April of 2015, she took the life of her 4-year-old son, Gavin. This evil mother would then give birth to another child, only to kill the infant just 3 months later. While there is no fathomable reason for such cruel acts, Brittany cited jealousy as her excuse. Envious of the attention her 3 kids were receiving from their father, Brittany chose a deplorable solution, murdering all 3 and leaving only her daughter Haley alive. This family saga then got even disturbing once it made its way to the courtroom. Brittany's defense revealed that the young woman had suffered serious brain damage from lead poisoning as a child. This fact allowed Brittany to sidestep the death penalty, but it also opened a doorway into the evil side of Joseph Pilkington. You see, before dating Brittany, Joseph had actually been engaged in a relationship with Brittany's mother, a woman much closer to his own age, considering Joseph was 2 decades older than Brittany, the future mother of his children. This is more troubling when you realize that Brittany was just 9 years old when Joseph moved in and became part of her family. After moving in, Brittany's new father figure moved from mother to daughter before Brittany was of legal age. This is what sent Joseph to jail. The sexual abuse suffered by Brittany at Joseph's hand in no way excused her actions. but she would later state that by ending the lives of her children, she was attempting to prevent them from becoming abusers themselves and repeating the sins of their father. Brittany Pilkington was sentenced to 37 years in prison. She will not be eligible for parole until she is in her 60s, and she will most likely never see her daughter again. Haley now lives with a foster family. Haley may one day wish to confront her mother over her horrific crimes, but that decision will remain hers to make, as Brittany faces the majority of her life where she belongs, behind bars. Our next 911 call is actually a 999 call, as it comes from the United Kingdom. A British stepfather found his son floating lifeless in the bathtub. Craig Smith called for help, and though he might sound heartbroken and desperate, that's only because he is afraid of what might happen to him once the police find out the truth about what happened to his 2-year-old stepson Teddy Tilston.
Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
No, he's not.
He's not breathing.
It's a little 2-year-old boy. He's just been in the bath. He's just swallowed water.
And he's not breathing.
He's not breathing. His eyes are open. He's not moving. No movement. No breathing.
Move any pillows and then kneel next to him and look into his mouth for food or vomit.
I've cleared all food and
vomit out of
his mouth.
Is there anything in his mouth?
No.
No.
Not
okay, now place your hand on his forehead, your other hand under his neck, and carefully tilt his head back. And then put your ear next to his mouth. Can you feel or hear any breathing?
It's just like bubbling.
Can you feel or hear any breathing?
No, it's just the air comes out.
Okay, I'm going to tell you how to give mouth to mouth. Pinch his nose closed and completely cover his mouth with your mouth. Then blow 2 regular breaths into his lungs about 1 second each. Just enough to make his chest rise with each breath.
Right, okay. No. It's just the air.
Could you feel the air going in and out?
Yes, yeah.
You could. Okay, listen carefully. I'll tell you how to do chest compressions. Make sure he's flat on his back on the floor. Place the heel of your hand on the breastbone in the center of his chest, right between the nipples.
Okay.
Push down 2 inches with only the heel of your hand touching his chest. Pump his chest hard and fast, at least twice a second. Let his chest come all the way up between pumps and tell me when you're done. Okay, count the compressions out loud.
1, 2.
Right, you need to be going at a rate of 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You're
still doing nothing.
You're doing really well. Just keep going.
2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right, now with your hand under his neck, pinch his nose closed and carefully tilt his head back again. Give 2 more regular breaths and pump his chest 30 times more. Make sure the heel of your hand is on the breastbone in the center of his chest, right between the nipples.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4.
Have you done the 2 more breaths?
Yeah, I've done 2 more breaths.
You've done the 2 more breaths, okay. So from now on, just keep giving him 2 breaths and then 30 pumps, 2 breaths and 30 pumps. Keep doing it until help arrives to take over. Tell me when you're right with him.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4.
You're doing really well. Keep going. Don't give up. This will keep him going till the ambulance crew arrives. Just keep repeating the cycle of 2 breaths and 30 pumps. 2 breaths and 30 pumps. Keep doing it until help can take over. Okay, tell me when they're right with you or if anything changes.
I can hear an ambulance now.
Okay, just keep going until they're right with you. Is there somebody in the house with you?
Well, no, just me and my other daughter.
Is she old enough to go and open the front door?
No, she's only 3. My missus is in hospital already with the other 2-year-old. She banged her head this morning.
Oh gosh, okay. Just you keep going until you hear them knocking.
Yeah, just knocking now.
Okay, run and open the door as quickly as you can.
Craig Smith maintained that he had found Teddy lying under the water in the bath, but this was no drowning. Once police arrived and investigated the scene, it became clear that something far more sinister had taken place. Both Teddy and Craig were completely dry. There was no sign of any bath water anywhere near the body. The truth of what happened to the 2-year-old is much more catastrophic. Teddy had approximately 65 injuries to his body, and he had been struck in the stomach with such force that the child had suffered internal bleeding. You might have noticed that during Craig's call to the emergency services, he mentioned having another daughter already in the hospital. This was no coincidence. Craig Smith had also physically abused Teddy's twin sister, Cassidy. Craig was arrested, but he would deny harming either child. Unable to explain their injuries, he simply stated that they were the results of slips or falls. Smith also claimed that after finding Teddy in the bath, he laid the small, fragile boy down on a towel and went back to the bathroom to empty the water out of the tub. This was a poor attempt at explaining the lack of moisture at the crime scene. No one was convinced. Craig Smith had flown into a fit of rage and attacked the child in his care. The 28-year-old sinister stepdad was sentenced to life behind bars, with a minimum of 17 years to be served. In addition, Teddy's mother, Ashla Willett, was convicted of child cruelty. As though she did not personally hurt her son or daughter, she failed them by not seeking help and by not getting Teddy to a nearby hospital for any of his previous injuries. Ashla was given 1 year in prison, and the world was given one more reminder that some parents are not fit to care for children. These frightful cases prove that 911 calls don't always tell the full story. Don't believe everything you hear, because someone asking for help might only be asking for help with hiding a hideous crime that they've just committed.
When a person loses all control, the unthinkable becomes a frightening possibility. But what if that person has an unshakable obsession with horror movies? Jessica Kamilar had such a fascination. She brutally murdered her own mother in a fit of rage, and then called the police to give a chilling confession. Discretion is advised, as Jessica's horrendous crime and the graphic confession that followed in this phone call are in no way suitable for the squeamish.
Hello, this is Alison from Police Emergency. We just received a call from this number.
Yes, I need you to get the ambulance and the police out here immediately.
To which address?
What? Oh, my finger's broken. I can't.
It's all right. Hello?
Hi, what's happened?
She just come in screaming for help.
My mum tried to stab me and I killed her, I think.
So did she just say her mum tried to stab her?
I don't know because of the...
Yes,
Yeah.
with a knife. And in self-defense, I think I killed her.
Okay, so she believes that she may have killed her mother?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know what the lady's name is?
Jessica Kamilar. Lady, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Your name's Jessica?
Mum has had enough of me because I admit I've been a challenge and this ongoing thing's been going for months anyway. She had enough of me. She grabbed me by the hair and dragged me from my room all the way to the kitchen, and she got a knife and she tried to stab me with it, and I grabbed the knife off her because I thought she was going to stab me, so I stabbed her back. I ran to my neighbour, not this neighbour, my other neighbour before this one, who's on the other side. He was at work. In the struggle, in the frustration, I didn't know what I was doing.
And you're outside the house?
Yes. The ambulance and the police have rocked up. Do you want to stay on the phone?
The depravity of this murder that took place in Sydney, Australia in 2019 is truly shocking. Jessica had inflicted over 100 stab wounds to her own mother. And to make the senseless killing of Rita Kamilar even more disturbing, the act took place whilst a 4-year-old boy was present in the home. The child, whose identity has been kept secret to this day, even attempted to intervene. In a selfless and desperate attempt to save his grandmother, this brave little boy actually put himself between Jessica and Rita. He was wounded but thankfully suffered no serious injuries. The mental trauma inflicted upon this child, though, will almost certainly stay with him for the rest of his life. Jessica's unforgivable killing of her own mother has no justification. There is no sensible reason for such a crime, though Jessica's story does offer a glimpse into how one daughter came to take the life of her parent. It also suggests that this killing could have been avoided. Jessica has a severe developmental disability. Her IQ is estimated to be between 55 and 60, and she also suffers from intermittent explosive disorder, a chronic disorder that results in sudden, uncontrollable outbursts of anger, usually accompanied by violence. Jessica's mother, Rita, had dedicated her life to her two children, Jessica and firstborn daughter Christy. By the time of the murder, Christy had already left home and was focused on raising her 4-year-old son. Due to 27-year-old Jessica's disabilities, she required around-the-clock care, and this responsibility fell to Rita. To further complicate Jessica's conditions, she also developed an obsession with graphic, gore-filled horror movies. Though Jessica did not view these movies in the same manner as your average horror film fanatic, Jessica would rewind and replay the movie's most macabre scenes, taking pleasure in the extreme violence and suffering depicted on screen. For Jessica, the movies left an unsettling impression on her, and they would become something she would later attempt to imitate in real life. In the months leading up to the murder, Jessica's behavior grew increasingly troubling. She also had a strange fascination with numbers. Jessica would arrange her favorite digits into phone numbers, dial them, and then have conversations with strangers. These weren't friendly phone calls. They often featured Jessica threatening the unsuspecting call receivers with decapitation and stabbings. These creepy cold calls became something of a hobby for the young adult. When a person would answer, Jessica would then become fixated on that person and their voice, and repeatedly call them again and again, sometimes over 100 times a day. And so Rita, after years of taking her daughter to doctors and psychiatrists, finally had Jessica admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Here, Jessica would receive much-needed help. But after little more than a week of medications and tests, Jessica left the facility. Any improvement seen while inside was quickly undone, as Jessica immediately stopped taking the medications she had been given by the doctors. On the 20th of July, 2019, Rita received yet another complaint about Jessica's behavior. The 27-year-old had once again been harassing an elderly man by repeatedly calling his phone, and so with seemingly no other option available, Rita took Jessica to the police. For many, being taken to law enforcement would act as a wake-up call, but it simply made Jessica angry. The following day, Rita and her 4-year-old grandson were in their home in Western Sydney along with Jessica. The grandson's presence only made Jessica more agitated, as she often felt jealous whenever her mother's attention was focused elsewhere. In addition to this, the previous day's incident was clearly lingering in Jessica's mind. And after being denied a second takeout fast food meal by her mother, Jessica snapped. She grabbed her mother by the hair, dragged her into the kitchen, and then killed her using 7 different knives as murder weapons. After committing her heinous crime, Jessica was quickly arrested by the Australian authorities. In a moment both terrifying and insightful where Jessica's mental disabilities are concerned, Jessica made this query multiple times. She even insisted that doctors might be able to restart her mother's heart and bring Rita back to life. After seemingly realizing the gravity of her situation, Jessica's focus shifted to herself and her possible punishment. She sought reassurance that she would not receive the death penalty. It seems that when faced with her own demise, Jessica was more than capable of grasping the value of human life. Jessica's harrowing call to police after the murder left little to the imagination, and it left officials with little investigation work to do after the fact. Jessica's trial revealed that she was also dealing with several mental illnesses. Due to Jessica's disabilities, her murder charge was lessened to one of manslaughter. She was found guilty and sentenced to 21 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 16 years. Jessica's older sister Christy shared a heartbreaking statement in court. She let everyone know that despite Jessica's developmental struggles, she was given the support needed to live a healthy and happy life, though Jessica ultimately chose not to accept it. I will never forgive nor forget a single thing about that evening, because Jessica was well aware of the help our entire family extended to her and tried to give her from a young age. Christy Torrisi, since being locked away for her brutal crime, Jessica has continued her destructive and dangerous behavior in prison. In 2022, the young woman convicted of manslaughter wounded 2 prison guards in an unprovoked attack. It's startling proof that Jessica has yet to learn to control her violent tendencies, and given the fact that it took 3 guards to restrain her during the incident, it will likely be many more years before Jessica is fit to re-enter society. Yet that possibility does beg the question: can rehabilitating give Jessica the treatment, therapy, and support needed to reform her as an individual? Perhaps, But then we also have to ask whether Jessica and her family were failed by a system meant to offer support to those with disabilities. There is no doubt that the Kamilar family attempted to help Jessica, but after the horrendous murder of Rita, it's clear that Jessica should never have been released from psychiatric care. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Or was Jessica always destined to become a killer? Whatever the answer, it offers little comfort to the victims. Most people call 911 with a desperate plea for help, but the 48-year-old father you're about to hear picked up the phone to reveal his terrifying secret. Discretion is advised because you may not believe the horrendous crimes that Randall Coffland is about to confess to.
Not on.
I just shot and killed my two kids, and I shot my wife, and I'm going to shoot myself now.
Sir, what address you at?
What?
What address you at?
450 South First Street, St. Charles, Unit 406. I'm going to kill myself now, too. My two girls are dead, and I'm killing myself.
Sir. All right, so 450 South First Street in St. Charles? Sir, stay on the line with me.
Randall Coffland's sickening confession is enough to turn any stomach. But for his innocent daughters and wife, their nightmare began years prior. Anjum Coffland met her future husband Randall when she was just 17 years old. Randall was a couple of years older at the time. After just 1 year of dating, Anjum married Randall. This marriage would eventually turn macabre in nature. But even from the start, their romance was marked by Randall's red flags. Anjum had emigrated from Pakistan with her family as a young teenager. Her parents were strict. They actually banned Anjum from dating. And they disowned Anjum once they learned of her marriage to Randall. Anjum was now alone with Randall as her only family. And this, sadly, fed right into Randall's obsessive need for control over his new bride. Just 1 week into their marriage, Randall demanded that Anjum convert to Christianity. Though this ID specialist revealed his controlling nature early on, Anjum withstood her husband's abuse for 28 years. Eventually, Anjum put an end to Randall's dictatorial reign by demanding a divorce. But in finally gaining the courage to stand up for herself, she inadvertently released a far uglier side to her husband. Randall's angry outbursts had plagued the marriage from the start. And just 1 month before the horrifying 911 calls, police were called to the home after reports of a domestic disturbance. After this initial alerting of the authorities, Anjum and Randall called it a day on their relationship. But this, of course, didn't mean the end of Randall's controlling behavior. After Anjum moved out, Randall stopped her from seeing her daughters, and even stopped her from making simple communications with them. Everyday chatter via text messaging was not allowed. Anjum Coffland managed to survive her horrific ordeal. She lived to tell a truly tragic tale. And years after the incident, Anjum was able to remember the fateful day in frightening detail. She remembered finding her daughter lying still, believing her to simply be sleeping, to then being confronted by Randall with his gun in hand. She says that her first instincts were to believe the gun to be fake. In the moment, the frightening reality did not seem a possible one. It was then that Randall informed his wife of the unthinkable. They're already dead. Randall then pointed the gun at his wife's head and told her that he wished for her to live on, so that she would suffer just as he had. It wasn't until Randall turned the gun down to Anjum's legs and fired that Anjum realized that her daughters were really gone. The day before Randall shot and murdered his twin daughters, he visited Anjum at her apartment, begging her for another chance at their relationship. Police found Randall in a bathtub with 2 guns in his possession. Anjum was taken to the hospital where she was treated for her single gunshot wound. She may have survived this marriage-turned-massacre, but a part of her died with her 2 daughters. She says she will never forgive her husband for what he took from both her and her young children. And today, Anjum spends her time as an activist helping people to learn the signs of a controlling relationship. Randall's appalling act of murder-suicide begs the frightening question that even after decades of marriage, do you ever really know the person you're sharing your bedroom with?